It's a reflection of what's going on in American culture. Intermarriage is taking place among many ethnic and religious groups in the United States.
People are integrating in the workplace and socially, and they're meeting one another, they're going to school together, and as a result of that, they're kind of blending in together in a way. And so we're finding that across the denominational streams, across the religious streams, there is a high rate of intermarriage taking place.
As a matter of fact, the younger generation doesn't even date as much as the previous generation. In fact, today, people go out in groups much more than they do as couples, particularly kids in high school, in college, and even in young adults. So there's going to be a greater likelihood that those kids are going to socialize with people that come from a different religious or ethnic background. Our schools are filled with a multiplicity of ethnic backgrounds. High schools, colleges, we're going to meet all of those people, engage them, and in some cases fall in love with them.
We have to understand that intermarriage has been a fact of Jewish life for hundreds and hundreds of years, actually going back to biblical times. And what has varied is the Jewish community's response. In the conservative movement going back to the 40s, we find in our literature that rabbis were concerned about the fact that intermarriage was occurring. And as we look at the literature through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 90s, we find that the rabbinic literature responded to the fact that the congregations were changing, that intermarriage was increasing, that new questions arose in terms of how do we relate to intermarried families, what do they do? Are they permitted to come to synagogue, to worship with us, to participate in our festivals and our holidays? How are we going to respond to the changing demographic?
Much of the conversation, and here again is perhaps where some of the change is taking place, much of the conversation is focused on why should the American Jewish community open its doors to interfaith families? That's the big question. Well, we'd like to change that question, and that is not just why should the American Jewish community and its institutions open its doors to interfaith families, but why would interfaith families want to cast their lot with the Jewish people? What's in it for the family? Is it special to raise a Jewish child? Is it special to be part of the American Jewish community? That's what we need to begin to communicate, and that's why there's a need for outreach.
We shouldn't shun these people, shouldn't shun people intermarried. When people intermarried, it's not because they're rejecting Judaism, it's just because they happen to fall in love with someone else. And that the Jewish community's response is to how do we reach out and embrace them and guide them and challenge them to take Jewish living seriously.
We will do a huge Seder this year with over 30 people 2 nights in our home, and Stephen will lead that. I was bat mitzvahed a month ago, and Stephen did the Haftorah interpretation as a Christian from his perspective in English, and so that's how we live our life, and you can.
And sometimes an intermarriage drives a Jewish person closer to their roots, and that's one of the reasons why we want to make sure that the Jewish community is there to respond to that need, that desire, and not push that person away. Too often, when an intermarriage spurs a person toward their Judaism and the community is not there to welcome that person in fact it works in an opposite way, and it pushes that person away, often never to come back. So not only have we lost an individual, but we often will lose an entire family and their children.
And the old ways still persist, and parents feel tremendous guilt and remorse and that they have failed. Children feel that their parents don't love them anymore, and they feel abandoned. Not only by their family, but by their traditions and the way of life with which they've been raised. These are the old ways. These old ways still exist today in the modern secular but religiously connected Jewish communities. And parents still experience those feelings of pain, of guilt, of failure when their children choose not to marry Jewish.
We've lost too many people over the course of Jewish history. We cannot afford to lose this generation. I don't believe we can afford it demographically, and I don't believe we can afford it ideologically either.
We have to meet people where they are and tell them that we respect the choices that they are making or have made, so that we don't allow them to feel abandoned, and at the same time so that we can draw them near, so we can mikarev them, we can draw them closer to us so that they feel part of our community, part of our way of life, and are encouraged to take extra steps to feel comfortable.
Similarly, the American Jewish community has not realized the impact potentially that reaching an interfaith family has on even something as broad as Christian-Jewish relations. Because what does it mean if a Christian family, a family of another religious background, now has Jewish grandchildren? How does that impact upon the way the American community looks at the Jewish community suddenly? Why do we not use that as an opportunity to build bridges between communities as well as instead of building barriers between those communities?
A person doesn't realize that a bris is going to be important to them until they become a parent. A person is not going to similarly understand how important it is to have a child baptized until they become a parent. And that's when tensions arise. That's where conflict begins. Because people will say, sometimes, I know I promised, but I didn't, it never occurred to me that I have these feelings. I changed my mind. And that can open just a Pandora's box of, of tensions and of pain and recriminations. And many times the marriage won't last because of those decisions. Because couples don't want to talk about things that they know are going to be painful. And so they push it off, and they let it go and hope that it resolves itself sometime in the future, and it rarely, rarely does.
If you look at population projections over the next generation or two, you realize that there are two things that will impact most significantly on the American Jewish community. One is its age, and the second is its below zero population growth. So even if you don't enter any other variables into it, that is, intermarriage that might lead to not raising Jewish children, the Jewish community will diminish because it's not reproducing itself and it's aging at a more rapid rate than is the rest of the community. However, once you add in interfaith marriage and a recognition that currently between 25 and 35% of intermarried families raise Jewish children, which means as many as 75% are not raising Jewish children, it exacerbates that diminution of the size of the American Jewish community. If we can raise the rate of interfaith families raising Jewish children from 25% to 50%, that in and of itself will wash the impact, the potential negative impact of interfaith marriage on the American Jewish community. So what that means is not only will outreach to the intermarried stem demographic decline, it's actually the only opportunity we have to grow the American Jewish community, and that's our goal.
When couples intermarry today, it seems to me that it's the responsibility of the Jewish community to reach out and to sensitize and try to bring these people in and make them feel comfortable in part of our communities in the hopes that they choose to raise Jewish children and to live a Jewish life and to become role models for other Jewish and potential Jewish people.
High priest sacrificed the animals of the offering at the temples, so the lamb was killed, so that's why the shank bone is on the plate. Okay?
I consider the fact that interfaith marriage is the most pressing domestic issue facing the American Jewish community today. And the wisdom with which we respond to that issue will in fact determine what the future landscape looks like, the landscape of the American Jewish community that we bequeath to our children.